7 months pregnant, Lady Lisa Morrow dragged her weak body toward the iron gate of her own palace. Her hands were shaking as she grabbed the cold bars, screaming for help while fire swallowed the stone walls behind her. Through the gate, she saw him. The man she loved. The man she trusted. Her own husband. Peter. He stood in the courtyard holding the only key, and beside him was Clara, the maid Lisa treated like a sister. Lisa's voice cracked as she cried. "Peter, please, the baby." But Peter didn't move. He just stared at her with a cold face, like he had no heart at all. Clara leaned close to him and whispered something. Then she smiled. A wicked, proud smile. Peter turned his back, put the key in his pocket, and walked away from his pregnant wife who was trapped in fire. Clara looked at Lisa one more time and said loudly, "Finally, it will be just us. Once she's gone." The flames grew taller. The heat pushed against Lisa's skin like burning hands pulling her down. Her eyes blurred. Her chest tightened as smoke filled her lungs. That night, Peter and Clara believed they had won. Lisa's life. Lisa's wealth. Lisa's palace. Everything was now theirs. But the fire did not kill her. Instead, it changed her. Filled her with a deep anger she never knew she had. Now she is coming back. Not as the gentle, trusting wife they betrayed, but as a woman who will take back everything they stole, and destroy the lies they used to break her. This is the story of a woman who was left for dead, but rose again to punish everyone who locked the gate and walked away. 3 weeks before the fire, Lady Lisa Morrow stood in the big kitchen of Morrow Palace arranging fresh white lilies in a glass vase. She was getting ready for the evening charity event. Her emerald green gown fitted perfectly around her 7-month baby bump. Every time the baby kicked, she paused and smiled softly. At 28 years old, Lisa had almost everything a woman could dream of. The Morrow estate covered 50 acres, beautiful gardens, old trees, long pathways, and a huge palace built with limestone and tall arched windows. The iron gate was strong and beautiful, and the estate had been in Peter's family for years. Lisa spent her time fixing the palace little by little. She chose the curtains, the paintings, and even brought in rare books for the library. She organized help for orphans and created reading programs for village children. Everybody loved her. They called her Lady of Grace. But more than the wealth or the palace, Lisa loved her husband, Peter. When they first met 5 years earlier at a meeting in Vienna, he swept her off her feet. Tall, handsome, deep eyes, Peter made her feel like she was the only woman alive. He talked about building a strong future together. About children who would carry the Morrow name with pride. Their wedding made the news. Westminster Abbey, a beautiful gown, important people from different countries. Their honeymoon in the Maldives felt like a dream. Peter had whispered on their wedding night, "I'll protect you always. You and our children, forever." Lisa believed him. But slowly, things changed. Peter started coming home late. His smile faded. And Clara, the maid Lisa brought in out of kindness, began appearing everywhere Peter went. Lisa tried to convince herself she was just overthinking. But she was wrong. The fire that later burned the east wing of the palace was visible from far away. Orange flames covered the night sky, dancing wildly and throwing shadows over the forest around the estate. Most of the workers had already run for safety. The village fire service would not arrive for another 20 minutes. But one man saw everything. Old Kelvin Beaumont stood at the edge of the trees, holding a lantern with his shaking hands. His heart was beating fast. At 73 years old, Kelvin had served the Morrow family for almost 50 years. First as a gardener to Lisa's late father. Then as the groundskeeper after the old Lord Morrow died. Kelvin had watched Lisa grow from a little girl running around the bushes, into the graceful woman now trapped inside that burning palace. And he had also seen Peter walk away from her. Kelvin was pruning roses near the south garden when he saw Peter and Clara sneaking out through the side gate. Peter's face looked empty, like he felt nothing. Clara held tightly to his arm, whispering something that made her smile. They both climbed into Peter's black car and drove toward the city without even turning back. Not once did Peter look at the fire. Kelvin felt fear run through his whole body. He didn't need any evidence, he already understood what had happened. He dropped his garden shears and ran. Most people didn't know about the servant tunnel. It was built many years ago during the war, a secret escape path from the palace basement to the forest. Kelvin had used it many times in his youth to carry firewood and supplies during tough winters. Now he was going to use it to save a life. The tunnel entrance was hidden under a stone slab behind the old chapel. Kelvin's stiff fingers struggled with the iron ring, but he managed to pull the stone aside. Thick smoke rushed out. The heat hit him like fire from an oven. He covered his nose and mouth with a wet cloth and went inside. The tunnel was tight and hard to breathe in. Flames burned through cracks in the ceiling. Pieces of burning wood fell everywhere. Kelvin crawled on his hands and knees, coughing, praying he wasn't too late. When he reached the palace cellar, everything was chaos. Fire roared above his head. The iron gate to the east wing was glowing red like hot charcoal, and behind it, slumped against the bars, was Lady Lisa. Her green gown was burned and blackened. Her face was dirty with ashes and tears. Her breathing was shallow and weak. "Lady Lisa!" Kelvin shouted. Her eyes opened slowly. "Kelvin," she whispered. "The baby, please." Kelvin grabbed the bars and pulled with all the strength he had left. The gate didn't move. Peter had locked it from the outside. But the hinges were old and the fire had weakened them. Kelvin hit his shoulder against the gate. Once. Twice. 3 times. On the 4th try, the gate broke and fell inward. He pulled Lisa into the tunnel just as the ceiling above them began to collapse. They escaped into Kelvin's small cabin deep in the forest, a tiny old place hidden between tall pine trees. Kelvin laid Lisa on his bed. Her whole body was shaking. Then she screamed. "No, no, it's too early," Lisa cried, holding her stomach. Her water had broken. The baby was coming. Kelvin had no medical training, no phone, no one to help. But he remembered delivering baby animals on his brother's farm many years ago. He boiled water, tore clean cloths, and prayed like never before. 3 hours later, just as sunrise touched the forest, a baby's cry filled the cabin. Lisa broke into tears as Kelvin placed the tiny child in her arms. The baby girl was small and weak, but alive. "She's beautiful," Kelvin whispered. Lisa kissed the newborn's forehead, crying. "Her name is Elise," she said softly. "After my mother." But even as she held her baby girl, there was something burning inside her. Something darker than sadness. Peter thought she was dead. He thought he had won. He was wrong. The baby's cries were soft and weak, so weak they barely filled the room. Lisa held her newborn child close, tears falling as the tiny fingers wrapped around hers. The baby was very small, his skin pale from coming too early and from breathing smoke. "His breathing," Kelvin said with relief. "He's a fighter, Lady Lisa." Lisa kissed the small baby on his head, her whole body still shaking. "Lucien," she whispered. "Your name is Lucien, and I promise you will grow up knowing the truth about your father." But even while she said those words, her heart felt like it was breaking into pieces she didn't know how to fix. 3 days later, Kelvin returned from the village carrying a small old television. He set it on the table, looking serious. "You need to see this," he said quietly. Lisa sat up on the bed, holding baby Lucien in her arms. Kelvin switched on the TV, and her whole world turned upside down. There on the screen was Peter. He stood at a podium outside Morrow Palace, wearing a black suit, looking like a heartbroken man. Cameras flashed everywhere. Reporters pushed forward. And Peter, the same man who locked her in a burning palace, began to wipe fake tears from his eyes. "My wife, Lady Lisa Morrow, was the light of my life," Peter said emotionally. "She was carrying our first child. Our son." He stopped talking and covered his face with his hands as if he couldn't hold his tears. Peter continued speaking on the television, pretending to be heartbroken. "The palace wiring was old, faulty," he said slowly. "We had plans to fix it, but we didn't act fast enough. And now she's gone. They're both gone." The crowd murmured sadly, believing every word. A reporter asked, "Mr. Morrow, how will you move forward from this tragedy?" Peter lifted his chin and tightened his jaw like a strong man trying not to cry. "I will honor her memory," he said, "by continuing the charity work she loved, by protecting the Morrow legacy, by making sure her death was not in vain." But then the camera moved slightly to the left, and Lisa's heart stopped. Standing beside Peter, dressed in a black designer gown, was Clara. Around her neck hung Lisa's diamond necklace, the one Peter gave her on their wedding day. On her wrist was Lisa's gold bracelet. In her ears were Lisa's pearl earrings. Clara held a handkerchief and pretended to cry like a grieving woman. But when Peter wasn't looking, her lips lifted into a small, evil smile. Lisa's hands shook so much that Kelvin had to take baby Lucien from her arms. "He killed me," she whispered. "He killed me, and now he's crying on TV. He's wearing a suit, she's wearing my jewelry, and the whole world believes them." Kelvin knelt beside her. "Lady Lisa, please." But Lisa's voice turned sharp, cold, and unrecognizable. "Lisa is dead. Peter made sure of that." She turned her burning eyes toward Kelvin. He wanted me gone so he could take my inheritance, the estate, the wealth my father left me. He wanted to erase Lucian, erase the child that tied him to me. He wanted a fresh life with her. Kelvin nodded slowly. What will you do? Lisa stared at the television, at Peter's fake tears, at Clara wearing her stolen jewelry. I'm going to become someone new, she said softly. Someone they will never see coming. Over the next 4 years, Kelvin helped Lisa build a completely new life. Her new name was Arya Delmorne, a French-Canadian investor with no link to the Morrow family at all. Lisa trained her body until she became strong again. She studied finance, law, and business. She learned to move quietly, like a shadow, and she waited. Because Peter and Clara believed they had won. They had no idea the woman they tried to kill was preparing to return. 4 years passed since the night the world believed Lisa Morrow died in the fire of her own palace. Morrow Palace had been rebuilt, bigger and more beautiful than before. The limestone walls were freshly painted. Crystal chandeliers sparkled in every hallway. The iron gate that once trapped Lisa had been replaced with polished bronze engraved with the Morrow family crest. Peter had risen even higher in society. He was no longer just a wealthy estate owner. Now, he was a businessman, a philanthropist, and even a political candidate. His campaign for Minister of Economic Development was everywhere. On billboards, in newspapers, on TV. People loved him. He talked about integrity, progress, and hope. And beside him, always, was Clara. She no longer wore a maid uniform. Now she wore Chanel gowns and Cartier diamonds. Lisa's diamonds. Clara had transformed from servant to socialite. Her past was wiped clean, just like Lisa's existence. She went to big events on Peter's arm, cut ribbons at charity openings, and gave interviews about supporting her partner's dreams. The media adored them. A modern power couple, one magazine said. From tragedy to triumph, another praised. But neither of them knew the truth. The woman they left to die was watching. Arya Delmorne, Lisa's new identity, stepped out of a black sedan in front of Peter's campaign headquarters in the center of the city. She wore a fitted navy suit. Her dark hair was cut into a sharp bob. Her face looked different, changed by expert makeup and subtle contouring. 4 years of hard work had changed her completely. Arya Delmorne, who the world believed was a French-Canadian investor, was now strong, sharp, and unrecognizable. She looked nothing like Lisa, the soft woman Peter married. Nothing like the pregnant wife he locked inside a burning palace. Arya fixed her sunglasses and walked through the glass doors with full confidence, as if she truly belonged there. She had joined Peter's campaign team through the Delmorne Foundation, a charity she secretly built using hidden accounts and smart investments. Her foundation donated a huge amount of money to Peter's campaign. Enough for her to sit at the same table with him. Enough to get close without raising suspicion. No one questioned her. No one checked too deeply. And not Peter, not Clara, not a single person recognized her. The first time Arya stood face to face with Peter again was during a big strategy meeting. 15 people sat around a long table. Peter stood at the front, showing poll numbers on a large digital screen. We need to focus on economic recovery, Peter said confidently. Show the public I understand their struggles, and that I became stronger after facing tragedy. Arya's jaw tightened. She sat at the far end of the table, pretending to take notes. Her face remained calm. Ms. Delmorne, Peter said suddenly, turning to her. Your foundation works with rebuilding communities, right? What do you think? Arya met his eyes without fear. Tragedy shows people who you really are, she said. But the public will only forgive you if they feel you truly earned redemption. Actions matter more than words. Peter smiled. Well said. But something flickered in his eyes, confusion, maybe recognition. He tilted his head slightly. Have we met before? He asked. Arya smiled politely. I don't think so, Mr. Morrow. Clara, who sat beside Peter, stared at Arya with narrow, suspicious eyes. Your voice, Clara said slowly. It sounds familiar. Arya didn't blink. I hear that a lot. I must have one of those voices. Clara still looked unsure but kept quiet. Over the next weeks, Arya moved through Peter's campaign like a ghost. She attended events. She studied their finances. She listened to everything. At night, in her apartment, she spread documents across her desk. Papers Kelvin had secretly taken from the palace before the fire. There it was. Insurance papers with strange numbers. Phone records linking Peter to a contractor known for starting fires. Money transactions. Everything. Piece by piece, the truth became clear. Peter planned the fire. He hired someone to start it. He locked her inside. He collected millions after claiming she died. And now he was using that money to become a politician. Arya stared at Peter's smiling campaign photo pinned to her wall. "You thought you killed me," she whispered. "But I'm not dead, Peter. I'm just beginning." A few days later, an invitation arrived, printed on expensive cardstock. "You are invited to a private reception at Morrow Palace in honor of Peter Morrow's campaign." Arya held it calmly, but her eyes were burning. 4 years ago, that palace was her prison. Now she would walk inside as a stranger, and no one would know the truth. The reception night arrived. Arya stepped out of her car wearing a black silk gown. Her hair was styled neatly, and her steps were calm and graceful. She entered the palace like she had never lived there. Everything was different now. The floors shined like glass. New chandeliers sparkled. Modern paintings replaced her antiques. Every touch of warmth Lisa once added was erased. Then Arya froze. At the top of the grand staircase, where her wedding portrait once hung, there was a new painting. A large, dramatic portrait of Peter and Clara. Peter wore a tuxedo, one hand on Clara's waist. Clara wore a red gown, Lisa's favorite color. And the diamond necklace Peter gave Lisa on their wedding night. They looked like royalty. Like they built everything together. Like Lisa never existed. Arya's glass trembled in her hand. "Beautiful, isn't it?" a campaign worker said beside her. "They make such a lovely couple. It's amazing how Peter rebuilt his life after such tragedy." Arya forced a cold smile. "Yes, amazing." Later, while everyone partied in the ballroom, Arya slipped away quietly. She knew every inch of this palace, every secret corner. She found Peter's study unlocked. Inside were rows of files. She searched quickly. Estate documents. Insurance claims. Bank statements. Everything her father left for her. The land, the money, the trust fund, was transferred into Peter's name after her death. He claimed 2.2 million euros from the fire insurance. All of it went to him. Arya photographed every page. Her hands were steady. But inside, fire raged through her veins. He stole everything. Her home. Her inheritance. Her life. And used it to build his success. "Who are you?" Arya froze. She turned slowly. Clara stood in the doorway, arms crossed, eyes sharp. "I'm sorry," Arya said calmly. Clara stepped closer, staring hard at her face. "There's something about you," Clara whispered. "Your voice, the way you move. I've seen you before." Arya met her gaze without blinking. "I just have one of those faces," she replied. "People say that all the time." Clara's eyes narrowed. "No, it's more than that." Before Arya could answer Clara, footsteps echoed in the hallway. An elderly woman appeared, Duchess Isabel Morrow, Peter's mother. She was older now, weak, leaning on a cane, but her eyes were still sharp. The moment she saw Arya, she froze. Her face went completely white. Her cane slipped from her hand and hit the floor. "Lisa," she whispered, her voice shaking. The whole hallway turned silent. Clara snapped her head toward the Duchess. "What did you say?" Arya's heart hammered in her chest, but she kept her face calm. She bent down, picked up the cane, and gently handed it to the Duchess. "I'm afraid you're mistaken," Arya said softly. "My name is Arya Delmorn. But people tell me I resemble someone. Maybe that's who you're thinking of." The Duchess stared at her with teary eyes. You look just like her," she whispered. Arya squeezed the woman's hand gently. "I'm on it," she said quietly. Then she walked away, leaving Clara standing there, frozen, suspicion now growing like fire inside her. That night, Peter sat in his study going over campaign papers, but something was wrong. Donations were dropping. Endorsements were disappearing. Negative stories were showing up in the news. Small things, but dangerous. "It looks like someone is working against us," his campaign manager said. Peter clenched his jaw. "Find out who." Across the city, in her penthouse, Clara paced back and forth with her phone pressed to her ear. "I need information on someone," she said sharply. "Arya Delmorn. I want everything. And if she's a threat, remove her." The fixer on the line laughed softly. "Consider it done." The message came at midnight. Emergency meeting. Campaign headquarters. Come alone. Peter. Arya stared at her phone without emotion. She knew exactly what this meant. Clara's fixer had done his job. They were closing in on her identity. She texted Kelvin, "It's happening tonight. Stay close." Then she dressed in black, slipped a recorder into her jacket, and drove into the night. Campaign headquarters was empty when Arya arrived. Only one lamp glowed in Peter's corner office. The whole building felt cold and quiet, like a tomb. Arya walked through the glass door, her heels echoing softly. She took the stairs slowly, calmly. When she reached the office, the door was already open. Peter stood by the window, back turned, shoulders tense. Clara sat in a leather chair, her face hard and angry. Her designer purse sat beside her, positioned on purpose. "Close the door," Peter said without turning. Arya closed it gently behind her. Silence filled the room. Then Peter faced her. His eyes were dark and full of fear. "Who are you?" he asked quietly. Arya smiled, a cold smile with no warmth. "You already know." Clara jumped to her feet, her hands sliding into her purse. "You need to leave. Right now." But Arya didn't move. She kept her eyes locked on Peter. "4 years ago," Arya said softly, "you locked your pregnant wife inside a burning mansion. You stood outside with your mistress and watched her scream your name. You turned your back, put the key in your pocket, and let her burn." Peter's face drained of color. Arya continued, her voice sharp as a knife. "You stole her inheritance. You cried fake tears on TV. You played the grieving husband while standing next to the woman who helped you destroy her." Clara's hand closed around something metal inside her purse. "Stop," Peter whispered. "Arya, stop talking." But Arya took one step forward. "You thought she was dead. You thought she was buried under lies and ashes." Another step. "But she didn't die, Peter." Another step. "I didn't die." Peter's legs gave out. He grabbed the desk for support, breathing fast, almost choking. "No, no, you're dead," he stammered. "You died in the fire. I saw." "You saw what you wanted to see," Arya said coldly. "But I survived. And I spent 4 years rebuilding myself into someone strong enough to destroy you." Clara suddenly pulled a small pistol from her purse, her hand shaking with rage. "You should have stayed dead," she screamed, aiming straight at Arya. Arya didn't move. "Go ahead," she whispered. "Shoot me again." Clara's finger tightened on the trigger. "Police! Drop the weapon." The door burst open. 6 armed officers stormed in. Clara spun toward them, but 2 officers tackled her to the ground. The gun clattered across the floor. "No!" Clara screamed as they cuffed her. "She's lying. She's a fraud. We have everything," a calm voice said from the doorway. Kelvin stepped into the room. Older, tired, but strong. In his hand was a small recorder. He pressed play. Peter's voice filled the room, cold and emotionless, recorded 4 years earlier from a hidden camera Kelvin had placed near the courtyard. "It'll look like an accident. Faulty wiring. No one will question it." Clara's voice followed, sickeningly sweet. "And the baby?" Peter replied. "Gone finally. And it'll just be us. A fresh start. Everything she owns becomes ours." The recording ended. Silence crushed the room. Peter collapsed into his chair, hiding his face in his hands. "I did it for love," he sobbed. "I did everything for love." Arya stared at him, unmoved. "You did it for greed," she said. "And now you will pay for it." 2 officers lifted Peter to his feet and cuffed him. "Peter Morrow," the officer announced. "You are under arrest for attempted murder, arson, insurance fraud, and conspiracy to commit homicide." Clara screamed as she was dragged away. "This isn't over. Do you hear me, Lisa? This isn't over." Arya didn't react. She simply watched the 2 people who tried to erase her get taken away, broken, exposed, finished. Kelvin placed a hand on her shoulder. "It's over, Lady Lisa," he said gently. "It's finally over." Arya closed her eyes and breathed out, the breath she had held for 4 years. "No, Kelvin," she whispered. "This is just the beginning." The courtroom was full. Journalists everywhere. Cameras rolling. The world watched as Peter Morrow and Clara stood before the judge, handcuffed, pale, and shaking. The evidence was too much. The recording. The documents. Kelvin's testimony. The fire report. The insurance fraud. The forged death certificate. Every lie, exposed. The judge finally spoke, voice firm. "Peter Morrow, you are sentenced to 30 years in prison for attempted murder, arson, conspiracy, and fraud. Clara, You are sentenced to 25 years for helping commit these crimes." Clara screamed as the sentence was read. Peter said nothing. He only stared at the floor, empty, defeated, a man who gambled everything and lost it all. Guards escorted both of them out of the courtroom while reporters shouted questions and cameras flashed everywhere. And in the front row, wearing a simple white suit, sat Lisa Morrow. She didn't smile. She didn't cry. She only watched in silence as justice, late, but finally delivered, took place before her eyes. The news spread everywhere like wildfire. Lady Lisa Morrow, alive after 4 years. The woman who rose from the ashes. From victim to victor. People were shocked. Social media exploded. Women who had survived domestic abuse, betrayal, and manipulation sent her messages. They saw their own pain in Lisa's story. She became a symbol, not of weakness, but of strength, not of tragedy, but of rebirth. Within weeks, Lisa officially reclaimed her real identity. Her father's estate was returned to her. The insurance money Peter stole was taken back. The mansion, her mansion, belonged to her again. But this time, she would rebuild it her own way. 6 months later, Lisa stood in the grand hallway of Morrow Mansion, watching workers remove the huge portrait of Peter and Clara from the staircase wall. In its place, they hung a new painting, a phoenix rising from the flames, wings stretched wide, powerful and unstoppable. "Mama, is that you?" a small voice asked. Lisa looked down. Her son, Lucien, stood beside her, holding her hand. He was 4 years old now, bright-eyed, curious, strong-hearted. Lisa knelt down and pulled him close. "That painting is all of us, sweetheart," she said softly. "Everyone who has walked through fire and refused to let it destroy them." Lucien nodded seriously, as if he understood everything. And maybe he did. 1 month later, Lisa stood on the mansion steps in front of reporters, dignitaries, and survivors. Behind her hung a huge banner. The Phoenix Foundation Support. Shelter. Survival. Lisa began speaking, her voice steady and full of strength. "This foundation is for every woman who has been betrayed. Every woman who has been silenced. Every woman who has been told she is too weak or too broken to rise again." She paused, looking at the crowd. "I was locked inside a burning building by the man I loved. I was left to die. My child was left to die. And for 4 years, the world thought I was gone." Her voice did not shake. "But I didn't die. I survived. And if I can survive, so can you." The crowd erupted in loud applause. Lisa smiled, a real, warm, beautiful smile, and cut the ribbon. The Phoenix Foundation was officially open. That night, Lisa stood alone in her mansion library, holding a glass of wine as she looked out at the garden she once loved. The moon glowed softly over the trees. The air felt peaceful. Kelvin appeared in the doorway, leaning on his cane. "Lady Lisa," he said gently, "it's late. You should rest." Lisa turned to him, her eyes soft and grateful. "Thank you, Kelvin, for everything. You saved my life." Kelvin shook his head. "No, my lady. You saved your own life. I only opened the door." Lisa smiled and raised her glass. "To second chances." Kelvin raised his imaginary glass with a smile. "To second chances." Lisa Morrow had been burned alive. Betrayed. Abandoned. Erased. But the fire did not finish her. It remade her. It shaped her into a woman no one could silence ever again. And now, she was finally free. Thank you so much for watching this story, friends. If Lisa's journey touched your heart, inspired you, or reminded you of your own strength, please hit the like button and subscribe. We share powerful stories of survival and justice every week. Tell us in the comments, what would you have done in Lisa's position? And where are you watching from? New York, London, Nairobi? We love hearing from you. Remember, no matter what fire you faced, you can rise again. Stay strong. Stay inspired. And never let anyone silence your voice.